We live in an era where it's almost absurd to think that a Major League Baseball team would share its playing surface with an NFL football team. When teams are worth billions, sports at its highest level shouldn't object itself to such injustice and stupidity. In the confusing era of multi-use stadiums stood the weirdest, smelliest, and decades-long reign of the arena known as Cleveland Municipal Stadium, aka the Mistake by the Lake. From 1931 to 1993, this place stood tall among the money-saving stadiums of the era. 61 years of quirks and sadness filled with bugs, a burning river, odd dimensions, trees, an unlevel playing surface, heartbreaking losses, bitter cold, an abrupt death, and an even more bizarre afterlife. Ah yes, Cleveland Municipal Stadium was so much weirder than you think it was. Its story is coming up right after this. July 1st, 1931, Cleveland Stadium, located near Lake Erie, is dedicated and deemed officially open. 2 days later, it would host a boxing match where Max Schmeling defeated a young stribling via TKO. By the way, the name Max Schmeling sounds like a meme account where a German guy huffs farts in a jar. Hi there, I am Max Schmeling. Yeah. The stadium was made partly of structural aluminum and was one of the first to be designed with the intention of being used for both football and baseball. It was huge, an unheard of capacity of over 78,000 seats, which surrounded a playing area of nearly 4 acres of grass and dirt. A full year after the Schmeling fight, the then Cleveland Indians moved in mid-season, playing their first game on July 31st, 1932. Even they hesitated on this place. Fans hated the dimensions as its dual-use configuration caused the center field fence to be 470 feet away from home plate, making home runs very difficult. Combined with the Great Depression, attendance plummeted in the early 1930s, and the Indians moved back briefly to the equally strange League Park for 2 years. But by 1937, the Indians had moved in permanently to Cleveland Municipal, where they would stay uninterrupted for the next 56 years. Football arrived early in the stadium's history too, with the Cleveland Rams of the NFL playing here in 1936, 1939, and 1941, and then the Browns, which were established in 1944, would set up shop here permanently in 1946, occupying the stadium for the next 50 years until 1995. For 47 years, this stadium was the poster child for both dual-use efficiency and dual-use weirdness. So let's cover those features now. The odd dimensions and vastness. Because Cleveland Stadium was designed with football in mind, it had a cavernous appearance that made baseball look comical inside of it. The original dimensions in 1932, portrayed in this fantastic diagram by Andrew Clem, has it at 320 down the lines, 435 to the alleys, and 470 to center, with an odd track around the field. This outcropping in center created weird dimensions that both fans and players alike hated, so much so that the Indians split time between Municipal and equally odd League Park for nearly a decade, sometimes only playing Sunday afternoon or getaway games here because either they didn't have lights or the lights sucked. Fans everywhere were what seemed like miles away from the game. A berm was placed in center field to warn players of the faraway fence, which was also weird, but it was so far from home, nobody ever got close to hitting it. Throughout its entire history, the dim lighting at Cleveland Municipal made the place seem dark and dreary. Again, players and fans hated it. Bill Veeck owned the team from 1946 through 1949 and installed movable fences that favored the home squad and were moved between games based on pitching matchups and lineups. MLB banned this practice almost immediately. The team did win the World Series in 1948. Their only one in Cleveland Municipal and their last championship. Now currently the longest drought in MLB at 77 years at the time of this video. While the baseball configuration was certainly odd, the football setup was equally weird. Though the stadium was purportedly designed with football in mind, the common problem of dual-use stadiums reared its ugly head. Baseball don't fit on football, and football don't fit on baseball. So you ended up with this: the stands on both sidelines far away from the field, and one end zone with the most of the infield in it, dirt and all. Now, stadiums like the Astrodome or Metrodome had movable stands that helped mitigate the geometry problem of dual use, but in the 1930s they were lucky to have clean drinking water, so movable stands were out. While the huge inside was more suited to practice fake moon landings than for baseball or for football, the architecture outside was pretty weird too. Giant concrete abutments in 30-style architecture flank both end zone entrances, and the west side looks like it wanted to be the LA Coliseum, but not really. Overall, the exterior was very minimal and plain. The stadium had a huge roof and overhang supported by pillars which obstructed views from the seats. At the time it was built, cantilevers were not being used, so vertical support pillars for roofs and upper decks were unavoidable. And of course, they made things suck. Even weirder was where the building was placed, practically on top of Lake Erie in an industrial area outside of downtown, which made for smelly, bitter cold, incredibly windy winters and equally hot, bug-filled, sticky summers. Listen, nobody moves to Cleveland for the weather. So bad was the climate that the field was often in terrible condition, in particular for football, where ex-QB Bernie Kosar stated that the poor conditions of the stadium and the field were a distinct advantage. In the late 80s and early 90s, the NFL had caught on to having better workplace environments, but not old municipal, where there was no hot water, terrible locker rooms, barely any training facilities, and outside of the Oakland Coliseum, one of the oldest and worst venues in the league. Apparently, the only amenity in the sparse locker room was a hot tub that was named the USS Thornton, a makeshift perk named after former Indians captain Andre Thornton, who played there in the late 80s. The hot tub, which players would sit or even sleep in after games, probably inspired this scene in the movie Major League. We'll get to more of the movie in a little bit. Much like Tiger Stadium and others of the era that used structural aluminum, the ramps and catwalks to the upper deck were rickety and terrifying, as the catacombs of metal and trusses held up the second level and the roof. And boy, by the end did the roof get ugly, as the harsh climate eventually just beat this thing up like every man's ego after spending 2 hours on a dating app. Earlier I touched briefly on the bugs, and though everyone remembers the Midge game, that actually happened at Jacobs Field in 1997. However, bugs were no stranger to Cleveland Stadium, and every year in spring and summer, these little fuckers hatch out of Lake Erie and probably annoy the shit out of everyone in the area like a million tiny little Skip Baylesses. Again, nobody moves to Cleveland for the weather. You don't hear anyone bragging about how they spent their whole summer in Cleveland and it was amazing. Finally, one cool thing about the stadium: it was around for so long and not much upkeep was put into it. Fans would paint underneath the seats various messages and then show them when the seats flipped up. That's pretty cool. Of course, if I had a marker, I'd probably draw a giant dick underneath there. That's what I would do. That's it for weird features. Now let's talk about all the strange moments that happened in the stadium. Though there were some heartbreaking moments, Cleveland Municipal was not a complete factory of sadness. The stadium hosted 6 NFL championship games, with the Browns winning it all in 1950, 1954, and 1964. The Cleveland Rams also won a ship here in 1945. As stated earlier, the Indians won the World Series here in 1948 and also hosted one in 1954. Len Barker pitched a perfect game here in 1981, and just like Derek Cope has milked the ever-loving last drop out of that night, he had his slurve working. Of course, we had the original Dog Pound, a group of raucous, likely over-intoxicated men who dressed as canines, drinking however you can imagine blue-collar guys from Cleveland would on a Sunday afternoon, barking obscenities and actually barking until either the game ended or someone pissed themselves, or more than likely both. Honestly, in the 80s and early 90s, the Dog Pound had a lot to cheer for, singing "We Will Rock You," because the Browns were pretty good back then. Just not totally good. Sorry, Cleveland fan, we're about to take things down a notch. In the 1980 AFC divisional game, the Browns were trailing the Raiders 14-12, but had the ball down on the opposing 13 with a minute to go. However, coach Sam Rutigliano didn't trust his kicker, so he called Red Right 88, a passing play intended for Ozzie Newsome. Instead, QB Brian Sipe threw a pick, and all of Cleveland vomited. 5 years later, John Elway led the drive, a 98-yard, excruciatingly painful march through the center of every Browns fan's heart. Now, that would be the closest the Browns have ever been to a Super Bowl. Luckily for the Cleveland faithful, they didn't have to witness the fumble in person, which happened at Mile High Stadium 2 years later. Sorry I brought that up. Let's pivot to baseball, where on June 4th, 1974, the Indians wanted to boost attendance for a midsummer night game by doing the smartest thing ever: 10-cent beer night. At the time, a beer was 65 cents, so this was a deep discount no true alcoholic could resist. It would be like $3 beer night today. That sounds like shit, honestly. Only about 25,000 fans made it out to the park, which tells you how bad the Indians were. But worse, the stadium didn't work out restrictions on beer purchases. There was a limit of 6 beers per purchase, but not a limit on how many times you could go back. So one dude could get what was essentially a 12-pack for $1.20 and get absolutely shit-faced, and that's exactly what happened. Fans started to get unruly as the Indians and Rangers, two teams that did not like each other, got a little chippy. Fans threw objects, including firecrackers and folding chairs. Some even streaked across the outfield and openly smoked the ganja. In the 9th inning, with the game tied, a fan climbed the outfield wall and attempted to steal the cap of Rangers outfielder Jeff Burroughs. This incident prompted Rangers manager Billy Martin to lead his players onto the field, armed with bats to protect themselves. This really happened. A full-scale brawl and riot ensued, with both teams and fans clashing on the field. Again, a Major League Baseball game. It sounds like a Pistons game from the 90s. The game was eventually declared a forfeit as a full-scale riot ensued. Now, who saw that coming? In 1981, the MLB All-Star Game was supposed to be in Cleveland. However, a player strike caused it to be temporarily canceled. So the team set up some folding tables and played a tabletop simulation of the game using a board game called Stratomatic Baseball. Announcers even called the game as if it were real, had Bob Feller throw out the ceremonial first dice, and had a crowd of 58 on hand. Holy shit. The world would have been fucked if COVID happened in 1981. The NL won the dice game 15-2, and 2 months later, the strike ended and the real All-Star game was played in Cleveland, and the NL also won that game. The movie Major League, that was based on the Indians, was not filmed at Cleveland Municipal, despite there being a few establishing shots at the beginning. Because the stadium was dual use, the facility wasn't available at the time the producers needed it. So Milwaukee County Stadium stepped up, and that's the site where Jake Taylor called his shot. Like how the Cuyahoga River burned in 1969 just a mile from the stadium, Cleveland Municipal Stadium would meet an abrupt and sudden end in the middle of the 90s. While the Indians were successfully able to escape the grounds in 1993, moving into the new retro classic Jacobs Field, Browns owner Art Modell grappled with the city over this newfangled thing called corporate welfare. Modell was dealing with his own financial shortcomings and Cleveland's reluctance to just build him a stadium. But instead of working it out, he bolted for Baltimore, doing more to fuck an entire city than Bonnie Blue ever has. In 1995, the Browns would play their last game in the Old Beast, a 26-10 win, ironically, over the Bengals, a team that only exists out of spite because Art Modell fired Paul Brown, the guy who his fucking team is named after, and then a pissed off Paul Brown founded the Bengals. Fans tore up the place, and it honestly didn't look that much different afterwards. It was already falling apart as chunks of concrete were falling and pilings were starting to petrify. December 17th, 1995 would be the last time high-level sports would be played at this weird stadium. The already dim lights were put out for good. Now let's talk about the bizarre aftermath of Cleveland Municipal. After Modell left, the city of Cleveland sued his ass, and the two parties eventually settled. The city agreed to demolish the old stadium and build a new one on its site, and Modell agreed to let the Browns use their IP and granted the records and history of the team back to the city of Cleveland, because honestly, who would want that shit? A year later, Cleveland Municipal was demolished, but that was just the beginning of the weird. Instead of carting away the debris to a landfill, they simply dumped it into nearby Lake Erie to form a reef, which I think is another word for trash pile at the bottom of a large body of water. They say it's for fishermen and divers, ah yes, to serve Cleveland's huge diving scene, of course. Cleveland Brown Stadium, aka Progressive Field, aka Huntington Bank Stadium, was opened in 1999 on the exact same grounds as Cleveland Municipal. They were smart to build a more enclosed arena with a higher vertical profile to mitigate winds. However, they did install a manufacturing plant which produces extreme sadness. For the young fans who come to the games now, they might not know they are on hallowed ground, or that the corpse of the old legendary and weird stadium is at the bottom of Lake Erie, miles away. They sure as fuck don't know what winning looks like. Maybe the grounds are cursed. The solution? Move out to Brook Park and build a $2.4 billion dome for 2029. Maybe they have finally learned from lessons past. Just kidding. It's still Cleveland. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like, comment, and subscribe. And as my self-worth is completely dependent on whether you like me or not, just subscribe. It's absolutely free. We're really close to 400,000. Just hit that subscribe button. Thank you. Appreciate it.